So tonight I'd like to do a bit of that game, spot the differences. And if we can make it interactive, I'd ask you to open up your chat. I'm sure everyone knows how to do that, and then you can play along with me as we go. We have in this week's Parsha Va'etchanan the Ten Commandments, the Aseret HaDibrot, which incidentally, that's the correct shape. They were cubes. The rounded tops, that's nobody's quite sure how that came in, but it's not a Jewish representation. If you look at our sources in the Talmud, they were cubes, each one, and they actually had inscription on all sides. And apparently the engraving went all the way through, and that was miraculous. But we're not talking about that tonight. Now we're talking about the fact that the Aseret HaDibrot text of those Ten Commandments is found in the portion of Yitro, which is in the book of Exodus, where it belongs because after the Jews came out of Mitzrayim and went through the sea, they arrived in the desert, and a couple of months after their arrival, in fact, to be exact, 49 days, 7 weeks, they stood at the foot of Mount Sinai. They actually arrived on Rosh Chodesh a few days before that, and then they received the Torah, and that's recorded there with the text of the covenant, the text of the words that they heard coming from the mouth of Hashem from Mount Sinai at that event, Revelation Covenant. In this week's parsha, they appear again. That's book of Deuteronomy, second portion, at Dvarim last week, this week Va'etchanan, and Moshe is doing a retrospective. He is remembering all that happened in during his leadership, and he talks about how they went to Chorev, that's Mount Sinai, and there God spoke to them, and then he repeats the words that are in the tablets, in the Aseret HaDibrot, or the covenant that Hashem shared. But here's what's very interesting. There are some very marked differences between the text of the first of the Aseret HaDibrot and the second. And now you can see them here. On the right is the first. That's the version in Shmot. On the left is the second version from this parsha, from Dvarim. And you can see the differences have been highlighted in color. So here is a difference. It's very slight. First commandment, identical. Second commandment, there's just a slight difference here of spelling, it seems. The word is pronounced the same way, but spelled differently. And then here, in the next one, there seems to be no differences at all. Once again, if we look now at the what have we done? 1, 2, 3. This is the fourth commandment, Shabbat, and there you can see just from all the colors here that there's some very, very significant differences, including an entire verse, that fourth verse, which is completely different from the one that we have on this side here. We'll have to look at that. I hope you're paying attention, because I'm giving you clues here for when the game begins. And then we have honoring parents, which is the fifth commandment. And you can see there's some differences here as well. You have the sixth, seventh, and eighth commandment. There's some very slight difference that may not necessarily be very relevant. And then 10th commandment, you can see some small difference, slight differences, but they're quite relevant. So how do we explain that the text differs from the one version to the other? I mean, like, which is the real 10 commandments? And this has been a subject of discussion over the centuries. What did God say, and what was actually recorded in the text, and what was actually inscribed on the tablets. Ibn Ezra, that's 11th century. He was born in 1089 and died in 1164. He says, the first set is the way it was heard from Sinai. Moshe when he repeats it to the Jews 40 years later, that's his kind of not interpretation, but his version. And there's some slight differences, and some are very significant and make a difference, and others do not make that much of a difference. They might make a difference in style. Interesting approach of the Netziv. He lived in the 19th century. Naftali Tzvi Berlin, the Netziv. He says, no, there were two sets of tablets, and the wording wasn't identical. What we read in the book of Exodus and Shemot was the version as the original tablets. But the second set of tablets has slightly different wording, and those were recorded or are recorded in this week's Parsha. The Maharal, he lived in the 16th century. And he draws a very important distinction between the first 4 books of the Torah and the 5th book of the Torah. He says, different angle, different perspective. The first books of the Torah were actually record the giving of the Torah by Hashem to the Jewish people. The 5th book of Dvarim, which we call Deuteronomy, which means a second Torah, second teaching, that second Torah, so to speak, that is from the perspective of the Jewish people that received the Torah. And so we kind of have two different angles or perspectives from the perspective of the giver and of the recipient. And of course, the 5th book of the Torah is very different, book of Dvarim, because it's Moshe speaking. If it's part of the Torah, it's God speaking. So is it Moshe, is it God? And that's resolved with the expression that's brought down in the Gemara, Shechina medaberet mitoch grono. The sound came out of Moshe's mouth, but it was the Shechina talking through the vocal cords of Moshe. So it's still God speaking, but it's kind of Moshe speaking, but it's entirely almost dictated by Hashem. So the first 4 books, Moshe had nothing to do with in the sense of innovating or saying anything. It was Hashem telling him what to write in the Torah. The 5th book is Moshe's version of it, and a lot of, and the reason it's called Mishneh Torah, the second Torah, or Deuteronomy, is precisely because a lot of the stuff is repeated, a lot of the laws are repeated, and it's always very interesting with all laws that are in the book of Dvarim to compare. How were they in the original, which is usually in Shemot or Vayikra, and how are they now in Dvarim, when Moshe repeats it, and there's slight differences, but they are very relevant. We'll do the exercise with the Aseret HaDibrot in the moment. And the Maharal says also that the second Dibrot had to be different because we were different people. Because the first set, or the first text was said before the sin of the golden calf. We were at that point at a high level of purity. The golden calf kind of defiled us. When Moshe repeats it to the Jewish people at the end of 40 years in the desert, he's dealing with a different paradigm of different people at a different level. I mean, they've been through a lot. In many ways, the relationship has been strengthened with Hashem. You know, it broke down, and when you're dealing, with a relationship with Hashem, then when things go wrong and then you repair it, it's stronger than it was before. So there was kind of, a tear, a schism, and we brought it all together. So in one sense, there's no longer the innocence and the purity that there was when we came out of Egypt as a nation, and our record was pristine. But there was this Meshuggah who used to hang out at my in-laws' house. Whenever anybody used to call, when he was clinically, Meshuggah, whenever anybody would say, "You crazy," he would take from his pocket out a neatly folded discharge paper from, I guess it was the mental hospital here in Johannesburg, and Torah, and he would say, "I've got a normal certificate. Do you?" It was pristine. We were God's people, but then there was an objection raised because it tore apart. And now we get the second luchot, which are our normalization certificate with Hashem, where everything has been fixed, but it's a different level. It's never the same. A Baal Teshuvah can never say, I've always followed mitzvot and been, there's always that record, but it's totally expunged once you have done teshuvah. In fact, it says that you at a higher level as a Baal Teshuvah than one would be, as a tzaddik, and that makes it very powerful. So, we're talking about Moshe recording the Aseret HaDibrot in Plan A, and then Plan B, which is a different level of the Jewish people. Rabbi Yaakov Yeshua Falk, 17th century. He says there is no real significant difference. It's about the style. Dvarim is no different style because of the words of Moshe rather than the words of God. And so he feels that the differences as they are more of a stylish nature than they really are. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, that's contemporary, well, almost last century. He was born in 1991, and he passed away in 1986. He says that the two versions reflect what's called Kri and Ketiv, or the written version and the spoken version. And there are many words in the Torah that are written in one way, but should be read in another way, because the words have two meanings. And likewise, in the Aseret HaDibrot, there is the written version, and then there's also the way it should be read, and that's why you'll have differences between the two versions, because one of them is written and one of them is the read version. Now, which was the written one? And he says his feeling is that the written version is the one that has shamor. And as we get to Shabbat in a moment, in the one version it talks about Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. In the second version it talks about Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. The latter version is the one that has Shamor. If I'm not mistaken, now I'm getting confused. How does he base the fact that the Shamor version is the written one? He bases it on a portion in our prayers. On Shabbos morning we say, Yismach Moshe, Moses rejoice, because God called you up to Mount Sinai and he gave you the tablets. Moshe comes down with those 2 stone tablets. V'chatuv bahem shmirat Shabbat. What's written in them is shmirat Shabbat. That's shamor, as opposed to zachor. So it would seem like Kamenetsky comes to the conclusion that it's actually the shamor version, and we're going to get to that in a moment when we go looking at the Aseret HaDibrot in more detail. And before we start actually looking at the text, we have the Shadal. He's a 19th century Italian scholar. His name is Luzzatto, and he says that it was a totally different message that had to go to the next generation. The people at Mount Sinai had to get the inspiration for the now and then. And their entry into Israel would have been, totally different if they followed what we call Plan A. But because things went wrong and it was a next generation, they had to get different messages. And so that messaging in the second version of the Aseret HaDibrot, that's for that generation. So you can open your chats, because I'd really like to hear from you. And here it is. So I've opened mine, and we're now going to get the text back on our boards and have a look at commandment number 1. Okay. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, shehotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. Version 1 and version 2. Okay, it's not the verse number because that's not relevant here. Is there a difference? Can you spot one? Anyone? You won't find one because those are absolutely identical. We then get to the second commandment. That's the prohibition against idolatry. Again, so here is the first version. Here's the second version. And on this page, there is no difference. So the first two verses, because this one has got 4 or 5 verses, this one identical, version 1, version 2. But when you get to here, there is a difference. Spot the difference. Anyone? Oh, here's the problem. I can't see the chat. Here it is. Chat. Nobody. Nobody. Okay. Okay, let me help you out here. Look at the spelling of the word mitzvotai. Last word. Thank you, Paul. Okay. Mitzvotai. And here in the second version, it's spelt mitzvato, still pronounced mitzvotai. The difference here, translation, keep my commandments, mitzvotai. But here, it would be read here as mitzvato, his mitzvah, but is actually pronounced mitzvotai. Is there any relevance to this? I don't know. I can't say. Yeah, I could probably make a drasha on it about the centrality of this mitzvah, and it's like the mitzvah, whatever. But I would just be making that up. I haven't seen it anyway. We get to the next one. Okay. Now here, I will be impressed if somebody can spot the difference. This is commandment number 3, and it is the prohibition against using Hashem's name in vain. Hashem says, "Lo tisat Shem Hashem Elokecha lashav, ki lo yinakeh Hashem et asher yisa et shmo lashav." Can somebody spot the difference? It is a very difficult one. It's the hardest one of all 10. Spotting the difference. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to give it away here. Look carefully beyond the words. Here we have a pay, and here we have a samach. Okay, that's not part of the text, but it is part of the text in a sense, and I'll show you how in a second. So pay means patuach. Samach means satum, open, closed. If you look, here is a sample of Torah text. Paragraph openings in the Torah are either closed, here we go, or open, as in here. Closed, 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 closed. So we only got one open one here, all the others are closed. Now, in many chumashim, it is indicated by, a samach here, a pay here, sagur or satum, closed, and patuach over here. So this would be called a parasha stuma. This is a parasha petucha, because it starts with an opening. Is there relevance to this? I don't know what the messages are, except that if you mess up with that paragraph spacing in the Torah and you don't get it right, then the Torah is not kosher, and you'd have to, well, there's little you can do except separate that one particular column and rewrite it and reinsert the parchment. That would be the only way to deal with that. So what are we looking at here? This is actually the text of the Aseret HaDibrot, and this is the commandment. Lo tisad shem Hashem Elokecha lashav, ki lo yinakeh Hashem et asher yisad shmo lashav. Question. First tablets, second tablets. Answer, first tablets. First of all, because there's a pay here rather than the samach, it's an open one, and also the giveaway is, of course, the word zachor, because in the second set, in second version, it would use the word shamor here for Shabbat. Let's carry on. Okay, we come to Shabbat. And Shabbat has got many differences, as you saw before, and we need to work through these. First of all, here we have, first version, Zachor Yom HaShabbat, remember the Shabbos day to keep it holy. And then here it's Shamor Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, observe the Shabbos day. Now that's a very significant difference. Now we're not talking about style here. Zachor is a positive commandment. Zachor involves the obligations we have on Shabbos. It involves Kiddush, it involves Havdalah, it involves all of the positive actions that we do, the meals that we eat, the clothes that we wear. That's part of the Zachor. Shamor is remembering or observing, and that entails all the prohibitions of Shabbat, the many melachot that we are not supposed to get involved in. It's not just a changing of the meaning. So there, the sages say the following. The word Zachor and the word Shamor were said simultaneously by Hashem. Now, how do you say two words at once? It's a bit of a challenge, but then, we don't have divine superpowers. But for Hashem, it was possible to say Zachor and Shamor as one, and every Friday night in Shul, you sing Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. The words Shamor and Zachor were said with one utterance. What's the relevance of that? Obviously, it's something that in writing you couldn't have done. So that's why in the written versions you got to have Zachor in one case and Shamor in the other. What is the point of God creating this miracle of two words being said as one? It's kind of to emphasize that Shabbat has got two dimensions and they're inseparable. And you can't say, people who keep Shabbos by refraining from melacha, and it's all about don't do that. This is muktzah. Don't do that. This is potentially a violation of Shabbos. They don't have Shabbos because they're just involved in the awe and the fear. On the other hand, if all you do on Shabbos is remember Shabbos, is make Kiddush, have a nice meal, maybe, put on nice clothes for the day, you haven't really got Shabbos. You've got some aspects of it, the stuff that's fuzzy and warm, but without the observance of the restrictions of Shabbos that help create that unique atmosphere, you haven't got it. So Hashem said both at the same time to stress the inseparability of these two dimensions of Shabbos, which we find echoed in the customs of women lighting two candles, one for Zachor, one for Shamor, which we also find in the two challas on the table on a Friday night, one for Zachor and one for Shamor. There are other reasons, but this is definitely, one of them. There's a halachic reason why they're kind of one. You see, what is a women's obligation when it comes to Shabbos observance? Clearly, the prohibitions of Shabbos, all the prohibitions apply to both genders equally. I was going to say all genders, but that's a dangerous word to use nowadays. Both genders. We're talking a Torah perspective, it's binary. So both genders have to observe. But women, as a rule, are exempted from time-bound obligation mitzvahs. So now that would mean that the woman would have no obligation to hear Kiddush, to hear Havdalah, and to get involved in all of the positive dimensions of Shabbos. By having Hashem link the two, we say that all genders are involved in Zachor just as they are in Shamor. Other difference on this slide, before I move on, also the addition of the words Kasher tzivcha Hashem Elokecha, as God has commanded you. Some say that it just means it was already mentioned in the first tablets, but then why does Moshe even mention that? Perhaps the meaning of these words is, and that's how most commentaries read it, including Rashi, that Shabbos was actually given to the Jewish people before Mount Sinai. A couple of weeks before that, they were in a place called Marah. That's the place where the waters were bitter, and Moshe was shown a stick, and he put it in, and the waters turned sweet. So that's where the mitzvah of Shabbos was commanded, and there are others. And then we get to the rest of the mitzvah of Shabbos, and you can see some differences again here. If anybody can spot them on this page, we have here. We have here differences in specifying the animals. Here we have behemtecha, your cattle, and here we have shorcha, chamorcha, chol behemtecha. It also gives you a reason here so that your servants will rest just like you do. Nothing really as significant as that other one. And here, the end. This is the justification for Shabbat. And it's the same. It's the last verse, but it's completely different because they're two different reasons for Shabbos observance. In the version 1, it's about the fact that God created the world and rested on the seventh. He created the world in 6 days, rested on the seventh. That's Shabbos. In the second version, it's about remembering the Exodus from Egypt. And that's why we have the observance of Shabbos. This is why in Kiddush, in the Amidah of Shabbos, we say Zeicher Yetziat Mitzrayim, remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. So there are two kind of reasons for observing Shabbos, and both are relevant. The one's listed in the first one, and the other one in the second one. Honor your parents. Commandment number 5. What do we have here? In the second version, we have again the words, as you God has commanded you. And that is one of the mitzvot, which was just like Shabbat, we had the same words, actually ordained at Marah. What we also have here is a bit of a longer version of the reward. You honor your parents, you'll have long days. And here, and not only is we have long days, but also good days, leman yitavlach. So it's not just long days, but also good days, which is important. I mean, quickly because time's running out. But there was a chassid who was promised by his Rebbe long life, and he turned back to the Rebbe. He says, "Yes, there should be long. I thank you for the bracha of long life, but it shouldn't be peasant years. I want you to make sure that, even though I live long, I've got my wits about me, and I'm able to continue doing mitzvahs and studying Torah and so forth." We had a shamus here at Oxford Shul years ago. Many of you will remember him, Mr. Coleman, and he insisted when you wished people long life that you not just say long life, but a long and good life. This is also very, very subtle. But yeah, a couple of differences. If you look here, we've got the conjunction velo, 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 because all these commandments are actually in one verse. So it's and. They don't put it in the translation, so it's missed. Also, it's about Commandment 9 not being a false witness. But the word used for false witness in the first version is eid shaker, the second version is eid shav, which really means the same thing. It's just a very slight nuance. So we get to the 10th commandment, and here we've got some significant differences once again. The order of the coveting is a bit different. Here is talking about first the house, and then the wife, and then servant, etc., and animal and cattle. Here, the wife comes first, and the house comes second, and then servant and cattle, livestock, and so on. But the other very significant difference is lo tachmod here, and here is lo tit aveh. What is lo tachmod? Don't covet. What is lo tit aveh? Don't, how they translate it, crave. This is deeper than that. Lo tachmod prohibits bars, actions that are performed to try and obtain somebody else's, scheming, offering money, looking for ways that you could properly get it, but you're actually acting it out. Tit aveh just means that you crave it in your heart. You look at your neighbor's car, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's home, and you kind of get filled with the longing and the wish that you could have it. This brings to that. The craving brings to the longing and the coveting, sorry. Yeah, here we have the differences. As you can see, some of them are very significant, namely Shabbat. The others may be differences just in style and form. And with that, wish you all a very good night, and see you next Wednesday all.